We take a look at the Chicago Blackhawks, their offseason moves, and is this the year that they start to compete for a playoff spot? That's coming up on this edition of Locked On NHL GameNight.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL GameNight. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL GameNight. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL GameNight, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL GameNight your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future's bets now. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we are normally discussing all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the NHL. But of course, it's the offseason. No games to recap, but we're helping you get ready for next season by previewing all 32 NHL teams during the offseason. Before we get to bring in our local expert for this show, Shu, we are going to talk about the Chicago Blackhawks today.
It's going to be exciting because after all, and pardon me as my voice crackles, because after all, I forgot that I have to take care of my voice instead of screaming at a football game. But the Blackhawks shouldn't be giving anybody any reason to be yelling, but rather they're a team that's on the up and coming. And I'm excited to talk about the young core that is building in Chicago, and as well as any potential next step that they may take this upcoming season.
Well, let's get into it. We are excited to welcome in the host of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. He is Jack Bushman, and he's going to give us the insights on the team that he covers on a daily basis. Jack, great to talk to you. How are you?
I'm doing
Jack in the box.
Thank you
Jack
both
in the
very
box
much.
today.
Thank you. One of my favorite spots, by the way. They don't got them here in Illinois, which breaks my heart. As a kid who went to college in Missouri, I found out that Jack in the Box was one of the greatest fast food creations of all time. Then moved back to Chicago post college, and things really haven't been the same for me. So anytime I take a trip back down to my old stomping grounds or go see some family that I have in enemy territory, as we call it in St. Louis, I try to make sure to go get a stop at the old Jack in the Box and get a couple of those tacos. But hey, fellas, thank you so much for having me on the show. Doing well here. As I was telling you, Eddie, before recording, we got the Chicago Bears in the midst of a preseason game right now. Caleb Williams had a couple of good drives. So doing well on my end of things, folks. Excited to talk some Blackhawks hockey here.
Yeah, I know we're all excited about football as well. But we're here to talk about the Blackhawks, obviously. And before we get into this offseason and looking ahead to next season for the Blackhawks, obviously want to touch on last season. Fifth year in a row, the Blackhawks did not make the playoffs. But in your mind, last season, were there steps in the right direction? Is this team making progress? Or are they kind of just spinning their wheels right now?
Yeah, it's tough to tell when you go and look at the results of the standings, Eddie, from those last 5 years. They haven't accumulated 70 points since the 2019-20 campaign. But if you watch this Blackhawks team, especially in the last 2 months of the season, when you got a young player like Frank Nazar, who was pretty fully established up in the NHL at that point, you got Sam Renzel coming in from college, Artem Levshinov got his first NHL stint, Ryan Green and Oliver Moore, two other young kids who finished off their college careers and joined on with the Blackhawks in the NHL late in the year. You saw what this team is starting to build and starting to come together as. Now, it's still going to be a little bit of it's going to test our patience a little bit this season because it's still going to be a very young roster, but you're starting to see some of those puzzle pieces, as I like to have called them over the years. They're finally starting to come onto the professional scene. And that's the tough part about having a rebuilding roster in the NHL or a rebuilding organization. You get those high draft picks, and that's what Kyle Davidson came in as a general manager to do, was kind of change the tides, get some high-end draft picks to hopefully, get some superstars here. But it takes a while for them to get onto the scene. Now we're finally starting to see some of those guys, and they're also starting to make impacts. Frank Nazar, like I mentioned, was one of the Blackhawks' best players in those final couple of months of the season. So they are starting to make progress. It's just kind of tough to see in terms of the wins and losses, but we're going to start seeing more of those guys come onto the scene year after year after year as we get a little bit further along into this rebuild of Kyle Davidson. So it's going to test our patience a little bit again this season, which I know Blackhawks fans don't necessarily want to hear. We want to start seeing results, but it feels like those days are starting to finally come here soon.
One player for me that really surprised me, and I mean really surprised me from last season, it was actually former Bruins prospect Ryan Donato, who had a career year last year on 31 goals and 60-plus points. And the reason why he surprised me was he doubled pretty much what was his previous career high of 16 goals and whatnot. And considering that up until now, he hadn't tapped into his potential as being a 30-goal scorer. We knew that as Bruin fans in terms of when Donato first got called up to the NHL, but he didn't pan out in Boston. He comes to Chicago. Heck, he was a bubble player back in training camp last fall, and he makes the team and has a career year. So my question for you is, why? Why the breakthrough this season that he was finally able to put everything together? And lastly, do you think that he'll be able to continue in being that consistent goal scorer that the Blackhawks believe that he can be?
Yeah, really good questions there. Donato was, given probably the best opportunity of his career here in Chicago, one of the first, true top 6 chances that he was given, and he just made the most of it. And there were a lot of players that kind of were on that top line revolving door and given some chances with Connor Bedard, but none of them established the chemistry, established as good of chemistry along with Bedard as Ryan Donato did. One thing that he mentioned in particular that could have possibly helped lead to this breakout type of campaign that he had last year was he really worked on his skating ability. He said he's really gotten faster in these last couple of years, and we've seen him be able to produce in transition, which is how Connor Bedard has kind of done most of his producing so far in his young NHL career, has been, in transition and on the rush. And Ryan Donato, with I think that uptick in speed, has given himself a little bit more of an opportunity to succeed in those positions. And I also think just the dog mentality that he brings to the table night in, night out. He's not afraid to go to those dirty areas right out in front of the net. And with the skill that Connor Bedard brings to the table, sometimes he needs that guy who can just go crash the net and put his stick on the ice, tap in those easy goals, go and clean up those rebounds. And Donato did that really well at both 5-on-5 and on the power play last year. Now, in terms of whether he's going to be able to replicate that again this season, it's going to be tough for him to do because he had a career high shooting percentage by a vast margin last year. But I do think, again, he's going to be in the same opportunity. He proved that he should be opening up the season on the top line again with Connor Bedard, considering how well they worked together through the majority of last season. I don't know if he's necessarily going to hit 30 goals again, but I do expect Ryan Donato to be a consistent contributor for this Blackhawks team, and not just in the offensive side of things. That was obviously huge last year for a Blackhawks squad that really struggled to score goals, especially under Luke Richardson's leadership in, the first couple of months of the season before he was fired, but also just doing the little things well and also being that veteran leader to some of these young guys, right? Ryan Donato goes about his business the right way. So even if he's not going to be, scoring 30 goals this year, he's going to be a key contributor in lots of different ways. And he's also going to be a good leader for some of these young kids to learn by from the examples that he sets out there on the ice.
All right, we're just getting started here with Jack Bushman. Going to get more into the Blackhawks offseason. They've got a new head coach as well. We'll discuss that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. You ever decided at the last minute you want to head to the ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's a game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It is the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save, you can splurge on more food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group of friends to come with you. Gametime makes it possible by buying tickets fast and simple, making you get tickets fast and simple. A price on the app actually dropped the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Gametime's the official ticketing partner of Locked On Major League Baseball. Make it easy to browse the app for an exciting upcoming baseball game of your favorite team. Gametime has last-minute Teals Zone deals as well. Takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're continuing with Jack Bushman. He is the host of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. Talked a little bit about Ryan Donato. He gets a 4-year, $16 million deal this offseason, but not a lot of activity, though, otherwise. $18 million in cap space for the Blackhawks, so they don't have a lot of money tied up really in anyone. That no one's making more than $5.5 million on the entire roster. Connor Bedard is going to be a RFA after the upcoming season. You've got a lot of money to spend. Where do you kind of see the plan at this point as far as cap space and what you've done at this point?
Yeah, I was a little disappointed the Blackhawks didn't use more of that cap space this summer, in particular with the forward group. I would have liked to see them go and get a legitimate top line or top six piece to really aid in the development of Connor Bedard and help him thrive in what's about to be his third NHL season. To only bring back Donato, which I thought was a very fair contract for him, 2 thumbs up for me on that move. But outside of that, for the only real forward addition they brought into this group being Andre Burakovsky, to me, it wasn't good enough, but I do also understand why Kyle Davidson went that route. And it's because he wants to be giving young players all the opportunities next year. And it's looking like Connor Bedard's going to be the top line center. Frank Nazar should be the second line center. We got young guys like Oliver Moore and Ryan Green, who I already mentioned a little bit earlier, along with Colton Dock and Landon Slaggard, who are going to be pushing for some of those final forward spots. And then when you look at the back end, if Sam Renzel and Artem Levshinov, both who looked pretty sharp up in the NHL late last season, if they both make the NHL roster, there's no real openings on the back end for the Blackhawks either. So while it was an underwhelming offseason and free agency for the Blackhawks, I do understand why Kyle Davidson sat put a little bit and didn't go and spend some of that money, but that is going to come next offseason, I fully believe. It's going to be time where, and another part of why I don't think Kyle Davidson spent a ton of money this summer was we're still kind of figuring out exactly what all of these pieces are, exactly what Connor Bedard is, Frank Nazar is, right? And I don't think he wanted to rush into any long-term contracts or anything before he knows exactly what he has with his young pieces. At the end of this season, we're going to have a real good knowledge about a lot of those young guys who I mentioned are now going to be up in the NHL. To me, the time to spend is going to be next offseason. I think the time for pushing for a playoff spot, unfortunately, it's not going to come in this 25-26 campaign, but I don't see no reason for it not to happen in 26-27 when, again, they're going to have all the cap space in the world. Yeah, they have to give Connor Bedard his next contract, but they still got so much flexibility to work with, and it's a pretty talented forward group in terms of free agency next year. Obviously, a lot can change before that point in time, but maybe someone like Kirill Kaprizov potentially hits the market. I really do believe the Blackhawks need just one more veteran top six established piece along with Connor Bedard and Frank Nazar to get them to their next gear. And that's kind of the one thing when you look at this roster, it's just a super underwhelming forward group outside of those young kids. So I kind of wanted it to happen this summer. I understand why it didn't, but next summer, I think absolutely Kyle Davidson's got to utilize some of that cap space finally and go get a big player in the forward market.
A trade that happened during the regular season last season that really caught my attention was when the Blackhawks traded Seth Jones, the defenseman, to the Florida Panthers in exchange for Spencer Knight and a first-round draft pick. The early impression for me for Spencer Knight was, holy smokes, this was a hockey trade that actually worked for both teams, which is rare, becoming increasingly rare in the NHL nowadays. So my question to you is, what was your impression of Spencer Knight when he first arrived in Chicago, and why is not the expectation, but the hope is so high for Spencer Knight given his early going in terms of what he did between the pipes for the Chicago Blackhawks?
Yeah, I was really impressed with Spencer Knight and his small stint with the Blackhawks after getting acquired at last year's trade deadline. Obviously, a completely new situation for him, right? And couldn't be any more different than what he had dealt with being with the Florida Panthers these last few years, where in a backup role behind Sergei Bobrovsky with one of the best teams, the best team obviously is the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions out in front of him, where, I mean, he would rarely face 30 to 35 shots a night. for Chicago, he was regularly facing, 35, 40 shots per game because it's just not the same level of defense. There's a lot of youngsters out there, like I mentioned, Levshinov and Rinzel getting their first tastes of NHL action. Mistakes are going to be made in those situations, and there were some ups and downs with Spencer Knight, but it's super clear that the upside is unbelievable for a player who is still only 24 years old, which is kind of crazy to say and think about how long he's been on the NHL scene. But the highlight reel saves that he can make, and it's just super obvious that when he's going right, he can be one of the best goaltenders in the entire NHL. I do think he's got to work on his consistency a little bit, but I do also completely understand he was in a new situation with a defense that was one of the worst in the NHL last year, right? So the amount of shots that he was facing on a nightly basis was a little bit different, and all things considered, I think he handled himself really well, and I do believe he's going to be the goalie of the future here in Chicago. Super excited for his first full season next year.
Well, you've got a new head coach coming into Chicago, Jeff Blashill. He is a guy that does have NHL head coaching experience, 7 seasons in Detroit. Didn't have any playoff series wins and only one playoff appearance. That was his first year with the Red Wings. What was your reaction to him being the next head coach for Chicago? And was there anyone else in mind that you had as maybe being the next head coach?
Yeah, it was an interesting hire for sure. He wasn't number one on my candidates list going into the summer or anything, but I do also understand why the Blackhawks went that way, with Blashill being someone who's very familiar with the development level and young players and going through rebuilds, and obviously spent some time with John Cooper, one of the best in the business down in Tampa Bay the last few years after not a successful tenure as the head coach with the Detroit Red Wings. I'm really interested to see how it's going to go with Jeff Blashill. And I'm also really interested to see if he's going to just kind of be a placeholder coach for the Blackhawks, or if they really do believe he can be the head coach when that competitive window opens up once again. Obviously, we haven't seen him in any practices or really anything at this point in the summer, as we're recording here in the middle of August. So it's only just a couple of pressers and some of his past work to go on in terms of his tendencies and how he's going to utilize some of these guys. But the Blackhawks haven't had a competent head coach, quite frankly, in far too long, with Jeremy Colleton and Luke Richardson. I give him a lot of credit. He was put in a tough situation, but 2 first-time NHL head coaches. Jeff Blashill doesn't have a ton more experience, but he is definitely more established at this level than the last couple of guys the Blackhawks have had in that position. So hopefully he'll bring some stability there, and it's going to be interesting to see what he's going to be able to do with the young players here in his first full season.
One of the things that was a staple during the Blackhawks dynasty run was their depth at defenseman. You talk about Duncan Keith, soon to be Hall of Famer, Brent Seabrook, Dustin Byfuglien, and Johnny Oduya. And even now, there's a depth at that position where it's really beginning to stand out. And I talk about guys like Ethan Del Mestro, for example, Nolan Allen, and then Wyatt Kaiser, Kevin Krasinski, and so forth. And my question to you is, what do you see from this growing and young depth of defensemen that the Blackhawks are currently cultivating, and what excites you about their potential prospects moving forward being a vital part of the Blackhawks' future?
Yeah, it's definitely the strength of their rebuild, and I really believe is going to be the strength of this team in a couple of years down the road, is going to be that back end. There are so many high-level prospects, from Sam Rinzel, Artem Levshinov, Alex Vlasic, who's really established himself as one of the better shutdown defensive defensemen in the league in his first few seasons. He's been very impressive, and compared to some of the other kids, he feels kind of like an old man when he's only like 23 or 24 years old himself. But that just goes to show how many young players the Blackhawks have in their prospect pool, and it's been really fun the last year and a half now that these guys finally on the pro scene to see what they have in store. And it's going to be super exciting to see a lot of them develop together really for the first time up in the NHL this year. I referenced earlier already, I fully expect Sam Rinzel and Artem Levshinov to make the NHL roster out of camp. I don't see any reason for them not to. I think both were ready to thrive up at that level late last season, and they only got another offseason to add some strength, add some more muscle, and get their game fine-tuned a little bit before heading into the start of this season. But what I really love about this blue line as a whole, not only from a depth perspective, but size and skating ability. And that's obviously become such a huge thing, especially if you want to make a long Stanley Cup run. You got to have defenders with size, and the Blackhawks certainly have that. I want to say Wyatt Kaiser is the only member of this young blue line group, which is like 7 or 8 players deep, who's under 6'1". Sam Rinzel, 6'4", Artem Levshinov, 6'3", Kevin Korchinski, 6'2", Alex Vlasic, 6'6", Del Mastro, 6'4". Like, they got a lot of big bodies on the back end, and a lot of them have some really good skating ability. Sam Rinzel and Kevin Korchinski, Wyatt Kaiser in particular, are 3 uber talented skating defensemen that I really do believe are going to be playing the kind of modern day defenseman that you want, a guy who can go back up and down the ice and skate all around and help out in that transition style. The Blackhawks got a lot of those defensemen. It's just now about getting them a little bit more exposure, getting them comfortable in the NHL setting. And that's kind of the name of this 25-26 season for the Blackhawks, is giving these kids the keys and really figuring out what they got in store for us. But this blue line in particular is super exciting with the amount of talent that they have on it. And it's also going to be super intriguing to see, just with so many bodies, it doesn't really feel like there's going to be room for all of them. And we've even seen some rumors potentially this summer of maybe Wyatt Kaiser, who's up for a new contract, possibly getting traded. Same with Kevin Korchinski, a first-round pick from 2022, who's still only 21 years old. Doesn't really feel like there's enough room for all of these guys, and it's unlikely that all of them are going to pan out, but it does still feel like something's got to give on the back end. And it's going to be really fascinating to see which ones establish themselves as key pieces of the future here in Chicago, and which guys could potentially be on the move to get this team, assets to the forward group possibly.
All right, up next, we're going to check out the projected lineup for the Blackhawks and more here on Locked On NHL Game Night. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling for your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ for week 1, this is your moment. So take a flyer on the MVP race. FanDuel right now has Lamar Jackson, the Ravens, as the favorite. Crown your champion in August. FanDuel has the Bills, Ravens, and Eagles all at plus 700. Or you can parlay your division winner dark horses, maybe Jack's Bears, to win the NFC North. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, we are wrapping it up with the host of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks. He is Jack Bushman. Jack, we're going to take a quick look at the projected lineup here. For those watching on YouTube, you'll see it. For those that are listening on the podcast, we'll give you the description of it. But we have projected a top line for the Blackhawks of Bedard, Burakovsky, and Donato. Nazar, Teravainen, and Bertuzzi on the second line. The third line of Dickinson, Doc, and Mikheyev. Green, Foligno, and Slaggert on the fourth line. Your defensive pairings, Rinzel and Vlasic. We have Kaiser and Dushanov, Del Mastro and Murphy, and a goaltending tandem of Knight and Soderblom. How does that look to you? Are there any positions that are kind of up for grabs, or is there maybe some areas where guys are slotted in that you might think would be elsewhere?
This looks pretty good to me for the most part. I think the top 6 You could probably argue, how you want to go about the forward lines, but to me, those are pretty clearly the 6 best forwards up in the NHL right now. I would probably personally have Teuvo Teravainen up on that top line instead of Andre Burakovsky, but with Burakovsky's goal scoring ability as a left-handed shot, I do also understand putting him alongside Connor Bedard, who could play over on that right circle or the left circle, and maybe create a good passing tandem with Burakovsky over on the right side, while Donato is known as the net front type of guy. It's going to be really, really interesting to see who gets those final spots in this forward group. They have Colton Dach, Ryan Green, and Landon Slaggert in the NHL lineup right now. All 3 of those guys are bubble guys and are going to be battling with, a veteran like Sam Lafferty, who the Blackhawks brought back here this offseason. I also think Oliver Moore could potentially be battling for one of those spots as well. There's a possibility that a couple of those guys begin in Rockford, but that's what the fun of training camp in the preseason is all about, seeing who's going to win those final couple jobs. I think that's really what the key jobs that are going to be available come training camp time. Defensively, in terms of the pairings, this is exactly what I have to open up the season. Alex Vlasic, Sam Renzel, Wyatt Kaiser, assuming he doesn't get traded and they figure out the contract situation, which I fully expect them to do. I think him along with Artem Levshinov could possibly be the second pairing of the future for the Blackhawks. And I think Ethan Del Mastro is fully ready to be a full-time NHLer. He's going to be competing with Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen for that probably final spot in the opening night lineup. But I think he's the one who's ready for it the most. And this is the last year of Connor Murphy's contract with the Blackhawks. So kind of shore things up on that right-hand side. Everything's kind of set in stone aside from those, I think, 2 to 3 forward spots and that final left-handed defenseman spot on the third defensive pairing for the Blackhawks. But as you can see, a lot of young players are going to be making up this team once again this year. And as I've kind of covered a couple of times already in this episode, that's really the name of the game for the Blackhawks. Give the keys to the young kid and let's see what they got for us.
Nick Foligno, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent come next summer. And his leadership during this rebuild for the Blackhawks has been invaluable. You can put a price on it. So my question to you is a twofold. One, how important has Nick Foligno been to the Chicago Blackhawks organization in terms of his leadership and providing the type of leadership that they need with so many young kids coming up and getting the opportunity to play? And number two, do you see a scenario where the Blackhawks bring him back, extend him, and give a new contract beyond this season?
Foligno has been awesome since his first day as a member of the Blackhawks. Obviously, he's wearing the C, and he's worn it so well. On the ice, he's been a great leader, leading by example, stepping up for the young guys whenever someone goes and takes a run at them or whatnot. And he's also been huge in the locker room as well. And with the Blackhawks being at such a crucial stage of this rebuild, and I've talked about all the young players on the show already that we have high hopes for, Nick Foligno has really been the dad of the group to show them how it's done, so much so that actually just on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, you know how these young kids love being on social media nowadays. They posted an Instagram photo of like a group of 9 of them had taken a trip out to Nick Foligno and his brother Marcus. Their dad, I believe, owns a fishing shop or a store or something right along a river up in Minnesota, I believe. And Nick Foligno took all the kids out there for like a summer trip, and they took an Instagram picture and they captioned it with their dad. So he's just been an awesome guy to have around, and clearly they enjoy having Nick around as well, going and enjoying a trip with him like that. And everyone's only had great things to say about Nick in his time here. And honestly, his like loyalty to the Blackhawks, it's amazed me just for a guy who's been here in such a short amount of time, how he's I mentioned said all the right things, but gone to bat for the Blackhawks in free agency as well. Like last summer, he was calling up some guys and saying, I know they're not ready to win right here, right now, but this is an awesome organization. They got a lot of promising pieces here. He was recruiting for the team. So he's been great on so many different levels. And I also do think, with Connor Bedard very likely going to be the next captain of the Blackhawks, he's learned from one of the best in the business in that role in Nick Foligno these last couple of years. So he's been super instrumental, and I kind of feel bad that he's likely not going to be here to see the fruits of his labor, because I don't see the Blackhawks bringing him back after the season. I'm not going to completely rule it out, because he has done such a great job in that leadership role. But I do think, again, just with so many, it's going to be another year where kids continue to come up to the professional level, and we're just not at a stage where I think we want to be giving kids, we'd rather be giving kids that opportunity over someone like Nick Foligno, who is kind of on the latter stages of his career. So I don't expect Foligno to get a contract extension, even though he's been excellent in many different ways in his time here in Chicago. But I know so many young players, when the Blackhawks do get competitive once again, are going to be very thankful for the time that they had with Nick Foligno. And I wouldn't even be surprised in like 4 to 5 years down the road when you hear some of these kids on like podcasts and whatnot, and they ask them like, who is that veteran on the team that showed you, how to go about the ways? I have a feeling a lot of them are going to be saying Nick Foligno as their answer.
Hey, Jack, one more quick one from me. Former Blackhawks captain Jonathan Toews is trying to make a comeback. He's signed on with a team in the division with the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, he's from Winnipeg. Just wondering your thoughts on him trying to make a comeback, and maybe what that first game back in Chicago is going to be like there at the United Center.
Expensive. I'm so happy for Jonathan Toews that he's finally at this point where he's confident enough in himself. That there was such a long time where he didn't know what that next day was going to look like for him. And I'm sure that had to be a scary thought for a guy who was in tip-top shape throughout the course of his career, day in and day out, never really missed time. I'm sure that had to be a very hard thing for him to go to. And he's kind of been outspoken in the last couple of months, doing some interviews and whatnot, kind of telling a little bit more about what he was truly going through. And he's also mentioned some of the things that he's done in, the last couple of years to try and get his body right. It just makes me so happy. And I know lots of Blackhawks fans out there as well, that he's at this point now where he feels good enough to return to the game once again. He is going to be playing for a bit of an enemy, though, as you mentioned, in the Winnipeg Jets. But it is going to be an electric atmosphere at the United Center when Captain Sirius comes back for the first time. I believe it's not until, I just went over the schedule a couple of weeks ago. I don't think it's happening until like late January or early February or something. So they're making us Blackhawks fans wait for it, but they're probably doing that, knowing what they're doing there to kind of drum up that anticipation even higher. But super excited that Jonathan Toews is back, and wishing him all the well with the Winnipeg Jets, his hometown team, as you mentioned, Eddie. Hoping it goes well for 19 with his new team.
Sure, you got a final one for Jack?
I am all set.
Then we will leave it right there. That is Jack Bushman. He is the host of Locked On Chicago Blackhawks, and we very much appreciate him giving his insight into the team he covers every day. If you're a Blackhawks fan, you need to subscribe to Locked On Chicago Blackhawks for all the latest news and opinions during the offseason and into next season as well. Jack, was good to touch base with you again. Thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to talking to you during the season on game night.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on, fellas. Was lots of fun. Enjoy the last month of the summer before things start ramping up in the second week of September or whatever it may be when training camp gets going.
All right. Thank you, Jack. And we'll be looking forward to the Blackhawks on opening night. They're part of that triple header October the 7th, as they will be taking on the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers down there in Sunrise, Florida. Maybe they'll celebrate the banner raising. They won't be ready for hockey, and you guys can sneak one there. Who knows? We'll see.
This is our fourth game in the last 6 years on the road for a banner raising ceremony. I don't know why they keep doing this to the Blackhawks. And also, if I'm remembering correctly, I believe this game kicks off at like 4:30 p.m. Central Time on opening night. So very curious what they did to us Chicago fans for this opener, but I'll be excited for it nonetheless. Even if it is yet another banner raising ceremony against a juggernaut Panthers team, it'll mark the start of hockey season, and that'll make me a happy man. Looking forward to it.
No doubt. No doubt. All right. Thanks, Jack. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And that'll do it for this offseason edition of Locked On NHL Game Night. We want your thoughts, though. If you're watching on YouTube on the Chicago Blackhawks, you can leave your comments in the comments section, and please subscribe to the show as well. We're going to continue these offseason looks at all 32 NHL teams leading up to the start of next season. If you've missed any of our past shows, they're available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And looking forward to the next time we get to talk to a local expert about their team. I'm Eddie Garcia. He is Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.